Sun walkthroughs. This is the first official section covering the adventure, and in this one we're going to go over the hooks that start the adventure out and hopefully get to the beginning of Chapter 1. I'm the Mad Hermit. I'm going to be your guide through most of this mess and see if I can't make it a little easier for you in running it. This podcast is intended for game masters, dungeon masters who will be running this adventure for their players. If you are a player, you are obviously spying here, and we see you and know who you are with our Dungeon Master's Spidey sense. So, spoilers. I'm going to have to give you that warning right now. If you're a player, you're going to be a lot of spoilers in this stuff. So, maybe avoid spoiling yourself. I don't know. I'm just, hey, working for your DM here. That's what I do. Did I already tell you I'm the Mad Hermit? I am the Mad Hermit. I forget that sometimes. I have to remind myself. I'll remind you too. All right, this session, we're going to start out with the hooks that get our adventure moving along the trail. We'll start with the hooks that deal with the goodly people, the goodly party, the hero hooks. These are probably the most common ones that will get used, and I'm not going to do them strictly in the order that they're here, and I'm going to give you a little more information about them than you're going to get in the module, I think. Let's start with the first one listed, which is the Agents of a Regional Lord. So in this hook, basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using the Lord that rules over this particular region of hill lands. This is the guy that's either owns or is responsible for the land that Dawn's Hollow sits on, the village where the adventure takes place. And you're going to want to place him probably 2-3 weeks away, either in a town or a city. It's just got to be a space larger than Dawn's Hollow and far enough away that we can't just run back. The players can't just run back to Lord Lonsdale is his name for help at the drop of a hat. Basically, this guy is going to gather the party together. He either puts out an ad or the party is recommended to him. And he says, look, I'm having some trouble in one of the villages under my protection, and I need to know what the hell is actually going on there. So he's going to hire the PCs, essentially to head out to Dawn's Hollow to see what all the commotion is. He's received some letters from the mayor of Dawn's Hollow. These letters are filled with terror and talk of people being kidnapped and strange things happening. He wants to know what's going on and see if that can be settled at all without him having to expend more money and effort than he already is. So that's the first hook. It's pretty easy. It's maybe the easiest hook in here, and it gives you a little bit more connection because it's going to throw your players into a situation where they're going to be looking for the mayor, and they already have the purpose of trying to help the village. They know something odd's going on, so it gets them in place right off the bat. Now, a second but sort of related hook we titled The Distrust of Wood Elves, and this, you could tie this into the Lord Lonsdale Regional Lord hook if you wanted to, or you can just have it be its own separate thing. In this hook, we left it more open in terms of like who might be hiring the party. Basically, regional lords, maybe a regional royal, somebody that's in charge of the area has figured out that there is some strange wood elf activity going on. They've received reports from rangers or from their own soldiers that have moved through the area that the wood elves in that forest we talked about being somewhere to the east or west of Dawn's Hollow, they're usually pretty good about staying in their woods and not coming out. Well, they've been spotted quite a bit in the hill area, or in the area of hills around Dawn's Hollow, and this has alarmed the local powers that be, so they've decided to send out some agents to poke around and see what the hell's going on with these elves. Are they planning an invasion? Why aren't they sticking to their forests? What's going on? These two can be tied together, the Agents of a Regional Lord and the Distrust of Wood Elves, if you want, if you need like more impetus. But otherwise, I detail them here as separate events. The Distrust of the Wood Elves gives a reward if useful information, can be brought back to whoever gives this to the players within 60 days or so, and that's quite a long time. I mean, honestly, by then the elves could have invaded and taken over, right? But you use the time frames best for you. I figured 60 days is enough. Gives your players, if you consider it takes about 15 days for them to reach the location of Dawn's Hollow, and then it's going to take like 15 days to get back, so actually leaves them about 30 days to complete the adventure, which should be more than ample time, but you can reduce that if you like. So my favorite of the series of hooks is probably the Priestly Concerns hooks, and this one gives you 3 or 4 different angles you can come at the adventure from. The first one well, obviously in this hook, your players are going to be agents or working for the Temple of the Sun, or however you phrase that in your campaign setting, whatever god that is. So you're probably going to need a cleric or a paladin involved with this particular hook. Otherwise, I'm not sure it'll do you much good. It's a little bit harder to explain why non-priestly characters would be involved in this sort of a hook. We give an option for that, though. It could be that your player characters end up owing the church something. They could owe a debt, or they maybe just owe like a boon or something. If they have some payment that they need to remake to the church might collect that by saying, okay, you're going to go out into the hinterlands to this village of Dawn's Hollow. We have a chapel there, and you're going to just basically work for that chapel for the next couple weeks. Do anything that the priests there need you to do. That might be just repairing the chapel. It might be taking care of business in their local area. Whatever it is, you come back here with a letter from them, and you're clear of the debt. Something like that. Could be that one of the party members or a family member of one of the party members has been arrested, is being held by the church or the temple for some reason in order to expunge this debt, or to get that person out of the temple's dungeons. They need to go out and just do this service for the temple in order to clear it up. Better way, though, is probably to have like the regional temple in charge of the area gather an actual cleric of the sun god or a paladin, and commission them to head out to Dawn's Hollow to collect the tithes, the sort of seasonal tithes that should come in from that chapel, and to deliver, whatever bowls and messages and orders that the regional temple wants delivered out to its chapels. They need to have those tithes guarded, so in this case it might be helpful for them to have a party of adventurers head out to do this sort of thing. It's not like a lot of money will be coming back, but it might be 200, 300 gold pieces, something like that. And they'll want that protected. So for some nominal fee, maybe a percentage of the tithing gain, something like 10% of it or something, they'll pay to the party for bringing that back to them. One of the other ways you could do it, probably the rare way, is that there's a major battlefield near the village of Dawn's Hollow, sort of a historic battlefield where a lot of the knights of the Order of the Sun, of this solar deity, perished defending sort of the southern lands from an orc horde at some time in the past. I think it's 300 or 500 years before the adventure begins, something like that. This battlefield isn't really well known, but if you have a character that's playing a paladin or a cleric that's tied into the more militant factions of this order, they might just decide that they want to head out there on a pilgrimage, or just out of curiosity's sake to go check out this old battle site. On their way there, they stop in the village of Dawn's Hollow, and they'll get caught up in these bigger happenings going on, and boy, are they going to get a pilgrimage to the battle site. They're going to get to see it firsthand, up close and personal, and so this is a pretty good hook to use if you have sort of a religious faction of players or a couple of characters that fit the bill for it. So those first three hooks are the easiest ones to use to implement. You can kind of just throw them in anywhere, get your players up and rolling on them pretty quick. The next two are a little more tricky. They can have, they're going to reach in and torque with your adventure just a little bit more. The first one is the visiting relatives hook. Now, in this case, what you have is this would be perfect if you are already running a campaign and you have your adventurers on the course somewhere else, and they happen to stop off in Dawn's Hollow. The reason they would be stopping off in this case is that one of the party members has a relative who just happens to live in the village of Dawn's Hollow. Now, this shouldn't be a close relative. It should be a relative they haven't seen in a while, but nonetheless a relative, and since they happen to be in the area anyway, they've managed to, talk their party into straying a week off the path or whatever to visit this little village and check up with Auntie whoever. You'll have to name the relative. You'll have to just kind of pick one of the unoccupied, they're all occupied, one of the unused or detailed hovels or houses in the village. Put your player's relative in that house, name them, figure out specifically how they're related, but you don't want them close enough that like the players would have like already been here. Ideally, you want your players showing up in Dawn's Hollow for the first time ever in this adventure. You don't want them to be familiar with the village already, or, like regularly visiting. So probably wouldn't work to have your PC's parents there, for instance. Chances are they've visited their parents at some other time in the past. unless they're estranged and they just haven't seen them for a long time. Whatever the reason, if you're using the visiting relatives hook, you want to set it up so that this is a relative they haven't seen in a long time and they haven't been to Dawn's Hollow. So however you structure the story to make that happen, you'd have to do that. The other complication with visiting relatives is once the character arrives on the doorstep, their first, the relative may or may not recognize them right away. Once they realize who they are, they'll be welcomed in with open arms, and then the player's just going to get the PC is going to get a deluge of the troubles that have been assailing the village. In the visiting relatives hook, you're going to end up transferring a lot of the sort of background and info dump that should happen with the mayor in the inn, and you could still have it happen with the mayor in the inn. But if you want, you can transfer all of that to the relative and have that relative give basically the same information, although they won't have as keen an understanding or insight about the information they're giving as the mayor will, because the mayor has witnessed a lot of the things he's going to be describing to the players, whereas the visiting relatives probably only heard most of this as rumors. So you may end up then having the players they have to go track down the mayor to get more specific information from him. The relative hook can be a good one because it should give the players more impetus to try to help the village. However, you have these relatives and they're going to stand out as like the key thing that the players are trying to defend. So in a way that could end up hoveling them, you're going to have to juggle that one. It's a good one because it's going to give you more role-playing options. It's going to let you flesh out the NPCs of the relatives, and the interactions between the player party or the player character party and the relative are going to be more interesting. You have a lot of avenues with that, and that's all worth exploring. And for some groups, that might be the way to go because that's going to be your more role-play heavy sort of hook to take. But it is going to make a little more work for the DM. You're going to have to keep better track of what's going on and expect your players to spend a little more effort trying to defend their relatives. Hopefully not so much that they refuse to leave the village to go out where they have to go to solve the mystery at the end of the story. The last hook has a complication. This is the Merchant's Concern hook. In this one, your players are starting from some other village, again 2-3 weeks away. They've been hired by a merchant's guild, or a what would you call it? A guild of like shippers, a shippers guild, like the people that hire out wagons for things to be moved around. The guild itself would try to take care of the members of the guild, and if you got a couple of wagoneers that have disappeared along with all the goods they were taking out to the village of Dawn's Hollow to trade, they're going to want to know what happened to them. They may even have to investigate what happened to them. So they will hire a group of adventurers to head out to Dawn's Hollow, try to figure out, hey, where'd our wagon load of supplies go, our trade goods? They're missing, and so are the drovers, and we want to know. So they are going to hire the PCs to do this. They're going to offer them a reward if they can bring back the missing supplies, the missing trade goods, and especially a reward if they can bring back the missing drovers. Because that's what these guys have to do. The main problem with this one is that while we kept looking for places to put that wagon, the missing wagon, it's difficult to place it in the course of the adventure. So somewhere near Dawn's Hollow, we have this missing wagon. But as the DM, you're going to need to withhold the finding of that wagon until after the main portions of the adventure have happened. So you're going to want to set up the situation where the wagon arrived, it even made the trades, and it loaded up with the goods it was supposed to bring back, but then it just disappeared and it never came back. Ideally, you'll have the villains have stolen it or taken it, and maybe the wagon itself can be found out near the tomb site where the dungeon portion of the adventure begins. It might be anywhere around there. It could be in like the campsite of the villains that's outside of the tomb. But you're still going to want to build this so that your players on this hook will have more impetus to go down into the tomb, which might be to try to find the missing drovers. If you're going to use this hook, you're going to need to add those drovers in somewhere. I would add them in as undead because they're obviously dead, and I would put them way down at the bottom of those dungeons so that the players are all wrapped up and way too invested to escape from the entire adventure once they've found their now undead drovers that they're looking for. Going to need to name the drovers and describe them so that the players know who they're looking for. Okay, now that covers the goodly side of the coin. The last hook we need to discuss is going to be the hook that you're going to use for the evil side of the coin if you're playing this through with a party of evil PCs. So for the evil party that undertakes this adventure, they come at it from a slightly different angle. They are aspiring members of the cult of Orcus. Orcus. Did I say Orcus? It's Orcus. The Demon Lord Orcus. And the PC party, it consists of a group of, I don't think you'd call them trainees, don't want to call them peons, just sort of the underlings. They're working their way up in the cult. They have yet to really meet or know by face or by true name any of the masters of their cult, because they haven't passed any tests. So the first adventure that they're all undertaking is their test to gain official, actual rank within the cult of Orcus. And so before the adventure begins, a few weeks back, the master of the cult of Orcus in whichever city you want to place this particular faction of the cult gathers the party together, tells them that there is something they need them to undertake, and if they undertake it correctly, if they succeed in what the task they're about to be given, they're going to be given carte blanche into the cult. They'll become full cult members with all the perks and powers that go along with that. So in order to figure out how this is going to work, the master of their cult is going to tell them there is another faction. There are many factions of the cult of Orcus, and one of the more powerful is a faction ran by the Master Belshazzar. What is the name? It's called the Order of the Death Crown. That's the name of the faction. Master Belshazzar is the powerful necromancer in charge of that faction. And of late, Master Belshazzar has been making some rather outlandish and large moves around the map. This has made all the other factions of the cult of Orcus a little nervous. These factions of the cult, basically each city is its own faction under one master, are all kind of in competition for the attention of their lord and master, for the attentions of Lord Orcus. And Belshazzar is already a fairly powerful necromancer in the order, and he is up to something. And they know he is because he's sending out his prized apprentices to many of the smaller villages and odd, distant locations. One of them being Dawn's Hollow, where the cult of Orcus in your PC's home city has learned that Master Belshazzar has sent one of his best apprentices, a necromancer named Altheron. So the goal, the task that the master of your PC's home base is going to set for the PCs is to travel to this small isolated village of Dawn's Hollow, posing as adventurers or wanderers, travelers, merchants, something, and find out what it is that this necromancer Altheron is up to there. They are to remain in disguise the whole time. They don't want Altheron to figure out who they are, or that they're from another faction of the cult of Orcus. They especially don't want Master Belshazzar, to figure this out. So the PCs have to maintain very low key to undertake from the evil side, which is good because that's going to hopefully keep your evil players in check somewhat. And they'll give them a little bit of money and tell them hit the road tomorrow, and they can't wait till they return. Now, as long as the PCs stay in disguise, as long as the secret isn't broken and nobody figures out that they are actually more cultists of Orcus, all will go well. That's really comes down to how well your players can roleplay that situation out and how they present themselves once they reach the village of Dawn's Hollow, which is the section that we are going to cover next. We have an alternative opening, depending on how you would like to open the scene for the adventure. I'm going to cover that. There's 2 different ways to do it, and that's what we will go over right now. So there's a couple of different ways that you might want to open your game, a couple of scenes you can open it with, depending on how you've gotten the characters to the village of Dawn's Hollow to begin with. If you're just starting this adventure out kind of cold, you have no background really, you just made the characters and you're wanting to run it, you can start them out right on the hill outside of town, give them the description that's written there, kind of a breakdown of what they're seeing. Hopefully you've given them the hook while they're there, and you can run from there. If if you want a more action-y opening, we give an optional opening scene right at the beginning of the book. I mean, it's right by the table of contents, or at least in the book it is. I think it's right at the beginning in the PDF as well. And in this case, you have them kind of slogging along the trails on their way to Dawn's Hollow. They're very near to the town. They're hungry. They're tired. It's been raining for the last few days. It's muddy, so they're probably walking alongside the wagon-rutted trail to stay out of the mud. So that means they're walking through the weeds and the bushes. Their feet are soaked. They're tired, and they're coming up the side of a hill. And over the top of the hill, they hear a roar and a crash of something against metal. It's a deep guttural roar. They can't see what it is. They're going to have to reach the top of the hill. So you can start right there, let the players decide what they're doing. Hopefully they're going to arrive at the top of the hill or maybe around the sides of it somehow. If you're going to battle map this out, you're going to want to put an occasional tree here and there, but mostly it's hills. Hills with deciduous trees occasionally. You know, it's not like a thick forest or anything. It'd be like extremely light woods, if anything at all. So reaching the top of the hill, they're going to look down into the sort of the gully between the hills on the other side. The trail they're on, the path, the wagon ruts or whatever, kind of roll down that hill and down into the gully there and then up the other side. But right down there at the bottom, they are going to see an ogre armed with a huge piece of wood or tree branch, bashing it against, fighting off 4 armored individuals. It's raining pretty hard, and this should be happening close to evening. They don't have the best view of what's happening down there in the gully. 4 sort of armor-clad, humanoidish, medium-sized people are fighting an ogre. So the party's going to have to decide what they want to do. Now, as they approach down into that fight, if you're going with this opening, once, probably going to open with missile fire, that sort of thing, but once they get close enough to the fighting, they need to make perception checks or something to realize that the figures fighting the ogre are actually undead. They're skeletons. And that might change how they've taken to this interaction depending on how the party went. If they all attack the ogre right away, they're basically helping the skeletons until they can realize that they are skeletons. If they happen to just, deluge the poor little ogre, he's not little, a big old ogre, with arrow fire and slay him, they will find out that these are skeletons when all those skeletons turn around and come up the hill toward them. There's some other bodies laying in the ground already that the ogre has. Those are skeletons the ogre has already smashed. The skeletons themselves will have to be dealt with, of course. If you want, you can throw another one on a hillside, kind of a little more distant, maybe an archer. That thing can start firing arrows at the players earlier, and you run that battle from that perspective. Now, one of the important things about having this battle as your opening is it's going to lay down one of the little things we need to establish early on, is that these skeletons are from several different races. They are dwarven, elvish, and human. That's going to be the main stock of, an orc. But there aren't any orcs in this battle particularly. When the adventure progresses to the point where the party has reached the old battlefield, the skeletons are made up of the races that partook in that battle. So you got dwarves, elves, humans, and orcs. That's going to be the stockpile of skeletons you're drawing from. And it doesn't make much of a difference in their stats, but it does make a difference in terms of knowing exactly where they came from, why they're in the region, and the fact that a necromancer is there at that battlefield. Helps direct your party right off the bat. Once you get the battle done, if you do the optional opening, then you're going to want to move to the first section where the party arrives just outside of the village on the hills overlooking it. There's kind of a long diatribe there you're going to want to read to them. It's the typical opening you would give from a cold opening, where you're just having your first start out in the adventure. We don't have many other sections that are that long to be read, but this one you might want to read to them. The idea here is just to establish the setting and the mood. It's near nightfall. It's dark. A storm is blowing into the village. You want to establish those elements. And you also want to establish the element that the village almost looks abandoned. It's all closed up. You can tell that there are fires burning in the fireplaces and hearths of many of the huts on this village, which is all kind of gathered down around a creek that's running through the area. And there's more trees down along that creek, so it's a little more forested in the village area than it is out through the general hill country around the sides. But you want to get some of these main sort of elements established. The player characters should be able to see off to their left, which is going to be like the southwestern portions of the village, the inn or the tavern called the Cutter Cup. And they're going to be able to see the chapel, which is across the creek from the Cutter Cup. Both of those are on sort of the southwestern side of the village. Those are the largest buildings in the village, and everything else is, I don't think there's, there's a tower a little further to the southwest on a hilltop. It also has lights inside of it, but there's nobody manning the tower or anything like that. So you want to use that opening just to get the basic description of the village given over to the players, along with the idea that there's not as much activity in the village as you would expect toward evening. There's no kids running around. Granted, it's raining a little and there's a bigger storm coming in, but even for that, there's not much activity. I mean, there's nobody out wandering around. Everybody's kind of in. Their houses are not only closed up, but all the shutters are closed on all the windows. The place is kind of locked down a little bit. You want to establish that as the party moves through because it almost seems abandoned. Now, if the party or any of the players decide to approach any of the huts or houses in the village, they're going to get cold-shouldered. People aren't going to open the door. They might talk to them through the doors a little bit, like, who the hell are you? Get away from the door, that kind of thing. The villagers are going to act frightened for the most part. I suggest in the module that you let the players notice a couple things. One, a dog might come out on the end of a lead rope near, it's tied near its front door and bark at the PCs, bringing out maybe the only person they see the whole time. And that person's going to have a club, and they're just going to draw the dog back into the house and slam the door, basically. And they're going to peek out of their windows at the party as they move past. The other element you want the parties to see as they move through the village, and you're describing the village to them, is that occasionally you want them to see the beady little eyes of rats here and there. There are rats around the houses. They're in the weeds. They're in the tall grass running between the houses. They're not so thick and everywhere that they're noticed like at every turn, but they're noticed enough that it's like, wow, there's a lot of rats in this little village. If your party came into the adventure on horses, now we suggest that they don't, but it doesn't make that big of a difference. They're probably going to want to stable their horses. There is a stable in the village. In the module, we give some optional, an optional description for if the party has to visit that stable first. It's not much detail, just a few things you can learn. If you're using the relatives hook, your PCs may already be trying to figure out where their relative's house is. The stabler isn't going to be able to give them much information. He's going to just direct them toward the inn. He's not going to want to tell them much information about people around the town, so he's not going to make it easy to find the house. There are no addresses, of course, because that just isn't the setting we're in. So your PCs are going to have to probably go to the inn, try to talk to some people there and see if they can get anybody that will let them know where their relative is, if that's the hook you're using. If you're using one of the priestly concern hooks, then your PCs are probably going to want to go to the temple first, to the chapel. At the chapel, they're going to be closed out. They can pound on the door till finally a young woman will be heard on the other side of it. She may believe that they are who they are, but she makes it emphatic that they are not opening the chapel doors after sundown. The PCs should go to the inn and come back in the morning at sunup. And other than that, she might tell them that there's going to be an execution in the morning and that for tonight the chapel's locked for safety. Something like that. She's not going to spend a lot of time describing what's going on. Now, the lady that they're talking to is Acolyte Theta, and she's in charge of the chapel at this point because the father has died. The priest that was in charge of the temple has died, and I don't know that she'll give much information about that. She may just keep telling the PCs to come back in the morning, and she'll tell them more then. So that leaves pretty few options. PCs generally are going to be moved, eventually funneled toward the inn where the rest of the adventure can begin from. Just a couple notes. I was listening back through that a minute ago and realized I missed a couple of things. If we can go back as far as the optional opening where the ogre battle is taking place with the skeletons, if you're using that and the PCs should happen to get through that encounter without killing the ogre, then the ogre will be happy for the help and able to be communicated with, well, roughly so, at the end of that battle. Now, his name is Blugre, and he's not the brightest ogre in ogre camp. He probably was the least bright of all ogres at ogre camp, but nonetheless he is an ogre, and he is now friendly with the PCs. And if you have a low level PC group that's coming into this adventure, Bluegra might be a big help in the course of things. That's why he's here. If your PCs manage to rescue him from the skeletons and befriend him, then they can have quite a backup here. Now, that brings up its own list of complications. You can't come walking into Dawn's Hollow with an ogre. No village anywhere is going to take that. I don't care. There's no wokeness for the ogre. I'm sorry. Ogres are on the outs with the village. He's not coming in. The players are gonna have to figure out a way to hide him, some place to keep him, somewhere to store him away if they make friends with him. If you want him to be involved later, I think it would be a good idea for that. To help with this, you might have an abandoned farmstead somewhere near the village, or an abandoned house or cabin or hovel or something where they can, maybe they can convince the ogre to wait there for him for a couple days, come out, visit him every day or two, give him some food. Then again, that can get tricky a little later in the adventure. You need him close enough that the PCs can reach him, but not, so close that he can be spotted out. It would be tricky. Anyway, you've got this ogre. He's there in the background. The GM is maybe going to have to jury rig it so that this ogre can reappear for the party later. It's possible that the ogre could find his way to the crick after there's going to be a point in the adventure where thorns are going to sweep through this whole area, these tall thorn bushes. They're going to clog up everything and sort of shut off travel everywhere except along the crick. So it might be that you could just have the ogre somewhere near the crick when this happens. He could come stumbling into the village at some point, and the PCs could try to protect him from the villagers, or even take him in a little closer to them. He might be a good asset to have in the dungeons later, if for no other reason than to just have a big, brutal NPC that can aid the parties in the course of the adventure. That's an option. So it's an option for the GM to consider using. You don't have to use it. You know what? A lot of PCs might just kill that ogre right out of the gate before they even realize that he's facing skeletons, so it may not even come up as an option. But just in case, we have that there. It's a safety mechanism that the GM can give to the PCs if they can make it through that first opening optional scene without killing the ogre. The next thing is that Acolyte Theta, who I discussed a little bit for the chapel in the village, I wanted to make an addendum to that she's pleasant but curt, and she is in charge. She's not going to be overran. Nobody's going to speak down to her. She is not going to take gruff from anyone, even through a door. So she will be as pleasant as she can be, but boy, there should be no questioning that this lady is in charge of that chapel, and she's not going to be cowed, or she's not going to pussyfoot around. She's not going to mince words. So you want to start establishing her character pretty early on, because she's a force to be dealt with. So basically, everything that we've spoken about so far is really going to cover the general opening of the adventure and get your party, your PCs, placed into the village of Dawn's Hollow and get them hopefully to the tavern, to the inn of the Cutter Cup Tavern. That's our starting point. That's where we need our players to get to, really, because that's where the adventure itself is going to start to unfold. Now, I know how things go in the course of a game, and man, anything could have happened between arriving outside of the town and making it to that inn. At this point, some of you may have your players arrested already. For all I know, they could be locked up at the constable's shack. They could be breaking into homes from, across the creek. God only knows what it is that your adventurers will have gotten themselves up to at this point, but hopefully they have mostly just minded themselves and have moved in the correct directions, and you have managed to corral the cats all toward the tavern. It's at the tavern that things are really going to start out. So the first thing you're going to have to establish is the description of the tavern. It sort of has an entryway that is got woven branches that form little walls around it, nice little bench there, some coat hooks, kind of a place where you can come in, take off your cloak, hang it on a hook, put your muddy boots under the stool or under the the little seat there, and then work your way on into the tavern. The tavern itself, kind of large and open, has a big fireplace off in the corner, has a bar in the opposite corner from that fireplace. And the first thing the PCs are going to notice, there aren't many people here. There's just a few, and most of those people are all gathered at that bar. And they're having some sort of a dark discussion amongst themselves as the PCs finally enter the tavern. It's at this point that the villagers kind of en masse and the party is going to get their first look at one another. So it's at this point that everyone at that bar is going to stop talking, turn around and stare at the heavily armed adventurers that have just come marching out of the rain into the tavern. It's at this point also that we want to discuss reactions of the tavern and the villagers to any stranger races that you might have involved in your PC party. We give a rundown of this in both modules, but you want to play to it because we are out in the hinterlands here. This is a fairly isolated small village, mostly made up of humans, dwarves, and a few halflings. Dwarves and halflings, this means, they're part of this ensconced community. While the dwarves and the halflings are not going to carry any sort of, at least not as much embedded, I don't know, I hesitate to use the word racism. I'm not trying to get involved in a political discussion, but they're going to have their own kind of, problems with things. Dwarves are not traditionally friends of elves, for instance. That doesn't mean that they're instantly going to hate an elf. It just means that might be kind of an issue for some dwarves and some elves. If, however, your PCs have come in here with like Tabaxi and Kinku or any other kind of strange races of character, this is really going to, this is going to shock these villagers. They're going to have heard of these kind of things because they live in the world they live in, but that's not what they see around themselves all the time. So you want to play that off like small town, the way that small town politics and minds work about these things. It's not exactly that they instantly hate something that's different from them. It's just they're very fascinated by it and curious. And if they're intimidated by what they see, if they see some half-orcs or something, that's going to come out. It's those small town minds are going to kind of digest that and kind of claw at it a little bit. They're going to get a little, they're going to giggle. They're going to do the things that those small town minds are going to do against anything they're not used to. That's all. That's what you want to establish. It helps to establish the idea that this village is pretty isolated. They are used to taking care of their own problems. They are not used to strange things, and they are fascinated to see them. It doesn't mean they instantly hate these things. It just means that their curiosity, their fascination, and their inhibitions are going to mix in a way that this might come out a little bit negatively. And strange raced characters this is something they wouldn't be unused to moving through a world where they encounter this anyway. So I'm just bringing that up here so that we can establish how NPC reactions and how conversations are going to take place and what kind of actions and reactions the PCs can expect from the NPCs that they encounter inside the tavern. Since this pretty much covers the basis of how things are going to open in Night of the Sun, and we've gotten to the starting point, I think I'm going to call this podcast at this point and cut it off here. This gets us at least up to the start, and then we'll start the next podcast with the actions, the things, the list of stuff that's going to take place inside of the tavern, what can come up, and how the PCs might begin to move along the line of their adventure and get us through the first night in Dawn's Hollow to the next morning where all hell is going to break loose. So this is a good point to break for that, and we will start all that in section 2 of the podcast. Thanks for joining me. I, again, am the Mad Hermit, and it was a pleasure getting to tell you all this. I probably missed 1,000 things. I hope not, and if I did, I will try to bring them up at the beginning of the next session if anything stands out to me. So have a good one, and I will see you in the next session.
Hey everyone, Ashiel here, and if you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, you can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/madhermitgames. In addition to our free walkthrough podcasts, we will be offering subscriptions which will include new dungeons, storylines, NPCs, as well as other exclusive content on a monthly basis. We look forward to hearing from you, so please consider joining our Discord channel, Mad Hermit Games, where you can connect with us, other DMs, and players. You can also email us at madhermitgames@mail.com, and all the links will be in the description. Thanks for listening.